Waiter humiliates humble old man, not knowing he's the owner. The coffee ran down Mr. Arthur's worn-out shirt as the hot liquid burned his skin. The waiter laughed loudly without a hint of embarrassment, while other employees watched the scene with expressions ranging from discomfort to poorly concealed amusement. That was when the young man in the impeccably white shirt, arrogant smile plastered on his face, picked up the still steaming coffee carafe and tilted it deliberately over the shoulder of the grey-haired gentleman. The dark liquid stained not only the clothing, but also the dignity of a man who only wanted to have lunch in peace. "Sorry, old man," the young man said, without a trace of sincerity in his voice. My hands slipped. Arthur Sullivan, 73 years old, felt the heat of the coffee soak through the thin fabric of his brown shirt. His hands trembled slightly, not from anger, but from a mix of surprise and embarrassment. He had seen a lot in life, but this was different. This was gratuitous humiliation, served right along with the daily special. "No problem," he replied in a calm voice, though his eyes betrayed the pain he felt. "Could you bring me a cloth, please?" The waiter, whose name tag identified him as Tyler Sterling, turned around to grab something from behind the counter, but instead of handing the cloth to the gentleman, he simply tossed it on the floor, near Arthur's feet. "Pick it up yourself," Tyler said, crossing his arms. "Or do you think I'm your personal servant?" A middle-aged woman at the next table lowered her eyes to her plate, pretending she hadn't seen anything. A young couple whispered while glancing discreetly at the scene. No one spoke up. No one said a word. Arthur looked at the cloth on the floor, then at the young man. Slowly, he placed his hands on the arms of the chair and stood up. His knees cracked with the movement, and he had to hold on to the table to keep his balance for a second. He bent down with difficulty and picked up the cloth. "Thank you," he said, without irony. Just the natural politeness of someone raised to respect people, even those who didn't deserve it. On the other side of the dining room, near the kitchen entrance, a man in a grey suit watched everything with a smirk. It was Gregory Vance, the restaurant's manager for 5 years. He approached Tyler, and in a voice low enough that only the waiter could hear, murmured, "Keep it up. The sooner people like that understand this isn't the place for them, the better." Tyler nodded, feeling validated by his superior's approval. After all, the Garden Bistro was known as one of the most refined establishments in the Upper East Side, in New York City. According to Gregory, people with that kind of appearance scared off the real clientele. Arthur cleaned the stain as best he could, but his shirt remained soaked and stained. He sat back down, picked up the menu with still trembling hands, and flipped through the laminated pages. His rough fingers, marked by years of work, contrasted with the glossy paper. A young woman no older than her 20s watched everything from a distance. Madison Sawyer had started working there just 2 weeks ago as a service assistant. Her brown eyes filled with tears at the sight, and she took a step forward, ready to offer help. "Stay quiet," Gregory said, blocking her path. He didn't even look at her, keeping his eyes fixed on Arthur. "If you stick your nose where you weren't called, you can leave right now, understand?" Madison swallowed hard and nodded, returning to her post near the reception. But something inside her rebelled. That wasn't how she had been raised. Her grandmother always said that respect had no age, social class, or appearance. And there she was, witnessing exactly the opposite. Arthur finally chose what he wanted. A simple dish, steak with onions, rice, beans, and fries. Nothing very different from what he ate at home, but he had his reasons for being there, reasons no one could imagine. "I'm ready to order," he announced, raising his hand slightly. Tyler came back to the table with dragging steps, as if he were doing a huge favor. "What'll it be?" he asked without taking his notepad out of his pocket, clearly with no intention of writing anything down. "I'd like the executive plate number 3, please." "Are you crazy?" Tyler let out a short laugh. "Do you know how much that costs here?" "I do," Arthur replied calmly, "and I have the money to pay for it." "Oh, really? Then show me first, because I'm not serving anyone who's going to eat and then say they can't pay." Arthur didn't argue. He simply reached into the pocket of his worn-out pants and pulled out a few crumpled bills. They were old bills, but still valid, $50, enough to cover the meal and still leave some change. Tyler took the bills with his fingertips, as if touching something dirty, and held them up to the light. "All right," he finally said, handing the money back with disdain. "But you pay in advance. I don't want to take the risk." "No problem," Arthur agreed, separating the exact amount and placing it on the table. Tyler collected the bills and walked away, but not before making a comment loud enough for the old man to hear. "Managed to save up your whole month's allowance, did you?" Stifled laughter echoed from a few nearby tables. Arthur just took a sip of water, watching through the window the people passing by on the sidewalk across the street. The neighborhood had changed so much since the last time he was there. Or maybe he was the one who had changed. Maybe both. In the kitchen, a woman in her 60s, hair pulled back in a tight bun and wearing a spotlessly white apron, prepared the dishes with the precision of someone who had been doing it for decades. Mrs. Dorothy Fletcher had been the head cook at the Garden Bistro since it opened, 25 years ago. She had seen many people come and go from that place, but she had never witnessed the kind of treatment that had become common in recent years. "Number 3 for that gentleman at table 9, said Tyler, tossing the ticket onto the stainless steel counter. Dorothy looked through the small window that faced the dining room and saw Arthur sitting alone, still trying to dry his shirt with paper napkins. "What happened to him?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Oh, I accidentally spilled the coffee," Tyler replied with a cynical smile. "The old man's fine. People like that are used to it." Dorothy pressed her lips into a thin line but said nothing. She needed that job. She had 2 daughters in college and a high rent to pay. She couldn't afford to be fired for confronting the manager or an employee protected by him, but that didn't mean she agreed. As she prepared the dish, Dorothy made sure to go all out on the presentation and the portion size. If that gentleman was being humiliated out in the dining room, at least the food would be served with dignity and generosity. 20 minutes later, Tyler returned to the kitchen and picked up the finished dish. Dorothy watched as he walked toward table 9, and then, to her horror, she saw the waiter stop halfway, set the plate on an empty table, and deliberately stir the food with his finger, messing up the careful presentation she had made. When Tyler finally set the plate in front of Arthur, the food was cold and looked like it had been messed with. The rice was scattered, the steak was in a strange position, and the fries were soggy. "Enjoy your meal," Tyler said with sarcasm, walking away before the customer could complain. Arthur looked at the plate. He knew exactly what had happened. It wasn't the first time he had seen food mistreated before it reached the table. But he simply picked up the silverware and began to eat, chewing each bite slowly as if savoring a feast. Madison, at the front desk, couldn't take her eyes off the scene. There was something in the way the old man sat, in the way he held his silverware in his upright posture despite his simple clothes, something that didn't fit the narrative Gregory and Tyler were trying to push. When Arthur finished eating, he wiped his mouth with his napkin and stood up. He walked over to the front desk where Madison greeted him with a genuine smile. "Is everything all right with the check, sir?" "Yes, dear." "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying a kindness that contrasted with the treatment he had received. "I just wanted to ask, Do you open at the same time every day?" "Yes, sir. From 11 in the morning until 11 at night." "Great. Thank you very much." He walked out through the glass door and disappeared into the crowd on the busy street. Madison stood watching for a moment, a strange feeling in her chest. There was something about that man she couldn't quite define, a dignity that no humiliation could erase. The next day, promptly at noon, Arthur returned. He wore the same brown pants, but he had swapped his stained shirt for another, equally plain and worn. Tyler saw him coming in and made a point of intercepting him before he could reach a table. "You again?" he said in a loud voice, drawing the attention of other customers. "I thought you would have understood by now that this place isn't for you." "I'd like to have lunch, please," Arthur replied with the same calm as the day before. "All the tables are reserved," Tyler lied shamelessly, even with several empty tables scattered around the dining room. Gregory appeared like a shadow beside the waiter. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem," said Arthur. "I just want to have lunch. I can pay if that's what worries you." Gregory analyzed the situation for a moment. Legally, he couldn't refuse service without a valid reason, but he could make the experience so unpleasant that the person wouldn't come back. "Put him at that table over there," he said to Tyler, pointing to a corner near the restrooms, the worst spot in the restaurant, where the smell of cleaning products mixed with the aroma of the food. Arthur followed Tyler to the indicated table and sat down without complaining. He picked up the menu and chose another dish, this time a slow-cooked country pot roast. When Tyler came back to take his order, the old man had his money already set aside on the table. "Same deal as yesterday," Tyler warned. "Pay in advance." Arthur handed over the bills without saying a word, and so began a pattern that would repeat itself over the following days. Every day, at the same time, Arthur Sullivan arrived at the Garden Bistro, received the worst possible treatment, ate his meal in silence and left. And every day he came back. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the first week, Tyler escalated the humiliations. On the third day, he served the dish intentionally cold. On the fourth, he swapped the order entirely, bringing something Arthur hadn't even requested. On the fifth day, he accidentally spilled ice water on the sleeve of the old man's shirt. "How clumsy of me, right?" he said with a laugh. Arthur simply wiped his wet sleeve and kept eating. His patience seemed endless, which only increased Tyler's frustration. It was as if nothing he did could shake that man. Dorothy from the kitchen watched everything with growing concern. On the sixth day, as she was preparing yet another dish for the mistreated old man's table, something caught her attention. It was the way Arthur held his silverware. She could see through the kitchen window, and there was something familiar about that gesture. It wasn't the common way. It was a specific position, almost professional. Where had she seen that before? The memory danced on the tip of her tongue, but it wouldn't fully take shape. On the seventh day, a busy Saturday, the restaurant was packed. Arthur arrived at his usual time, and for once, there wasn't a single table available. He stood by the hostess stand, waiting patiently, while Madison checked the reservation list. "It'll be about 20 minutes, sir," she explained with genuine kindness. "No problem. I can wait." Tyler walked past him carrying a tray and on purpose bumped hard into Arthur's shoulder, making the old man stumble. "Get out of the way," he snarled. "You're blocking the service." Arthur stepped aside, leaning lightly against the wall. His eyes, however, showed no anger. They showed something different, something that looked like observation, as if he were studying every detail, every behavior, every reaction. An elegant lady with neatly styled white hair and expensive clothes witnessed the incident. She was waiting for her friend so they could have lunch together, and couldn't help but speak up. "That's outrageous," she exclaimed, addressing Gregory, who happened to walk by at that moment. "How can you treat a customer like that?" "You needn't worry, ma'am," Gregory replied with a professional smile. "That gentleman isn't exactly a regular customer. He just shows up." "So what? Is his money worth less than mine?" Gregory didn't answer. He simply gave a polite bow and walked away. The lady remained indignant, but her friend arrived just then and distracted her with talk of other matters. When a table finally opened up, Madison called Arthur over. "Sir, you can come this way, please. Table 7 is available." But before he could move, Tyler intercepted. "No, that table's reserved." "It's not on the list," Madison protested timidly. "Yes, it is. You just can't read properly." Madison lowered her eyes, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Arthur saw the young woman shrink into herself and felt a pang of something in his chest. It wasn't exactly for himself that he cared, but for that girl trying to do her job with dignity while being crushed by a cruel system. "It's all right," Arthur interjected softly. "I can wait a little longer." "Or you could just leave," Tyler suggested with a crooked smile. "That'd be better for everyone." At that moment, Dorothy came out of the kitchen carrying a special dish she had prepared for a VIP customer. As she passed the group near the hostess stand, her eyes met Arthur's for a second longer than usual, and then, like a bolt of lightning, the memory came back. Those hands, that way of holding the silverware. She knew that. She had seen it years ago when the restaurant first opened. She had seen it in the founder, the man who hired her personally and taught her half of what she knew about professional cooking. But it couldn't be. The founder was a well-dressed man, always impeccable, with that gold ring on his index finger and that expensive watch on his wrist. It couldn't be that old man in shabby clothes with trembling hands. Or could it? Dorothy shook her head, pushing the thought away. She must be going crazy. So many years of working under pressure were taking a toll on her mind. She kept walking and delivered the dish to the customer at table 15. But her gaze kept drifting back to Arthur. Another 15 minutes passed before a new table opened up. This time, Tyler couldn't make up excuses because there were 3 witnesses who confirmed the table was free. Arthur was led over, sat down and placed his order. Lunch special number 5, grilled chicken with vegetables and brown rice. "How much is that?" he asked, already reaching for his money. $75. The price was inflated. The dish cost $58 according to the menu. Arthur knew that, but he didn't argue. He paid the $75 without blinking. When Tyler Sterling took the ticket to the kitchen, Dorothy couldn't take it anymore. "Tyler," she called out, her voice carrying an authority she rarely used. "That gentleman, how long has he been coming here?" "About a week," the waiter replied with disinterest. "Why? Don't you find it strange? He comes back every day even after being treated like that." "It's not strange, it's pathetic," Tyler laughed. "People like that are masochists. They like going places where they're not welcome just to feel important." Dorothy bit her tongue. She wanted to say so many things, but she knew it wouldn't do any good. Tyler had become Gregory's protégé, and any word against him would be seen as defiance. She prepared the gentleman's dish with even more care than on previous days. She made sure the chicken was juicy, the vegetables perfectly al dente, the rice cooked just right. If she couldn't defend that man with words, at least she'd make sure he ate well. But once again, Tyler found a way to sabotage it. This time he left the plate sitting on the counter for 15 minutes until the food got cold before bringing it to the table. And when he finally served it, he made a point of setting it down roughly, sending a few grains of rice hopping onto the tablecloth. "There you go," he said without the slightest care. "Enjoy." Arthur thanked him politely and began to eat. Even cold, the food was delicious. He could feel the affection the cook had put into the preparation, and in a way, that made up for the venom he received from the other staff. That night, when the restaurant closed and all the staff had gone home, Gregory stayed alone in the office doing the cash reconciliation. It was his Saturday routine, and that's when he noticed something strange. The numbers didn't add up. It wasn't a big difference, only $500, but it was consistent. Over the past few weeks, some amount was always missing. Small sums that, added up over time, represented a considerable shortfall. Gregory looked at the records and an idea began to take shape in his mind. If anyone discovered that inconsistency, he'd be the prime suspect. After all, he was the manager. He had access to everything. He needed to find a scapegoat before anyone started asking inconvenient questions. But who would be the perfect fall guy? His eyes lit up with a cruel idea. That annoying old man who showed up every day. What if he planted some evidence linking the gentleman to the missing money? A desperate man, shabbily dressed in need of cash. It would be a convincing story. Gregory smiled to himself in the empty office. But first he needed to make sure he had someone on his side. Someone who could vouch for his version of events if necessary. Tyler would be perfect for that. The waiter had already shown his loyalty by taking part in the humiliation campaign. Surely he wouldn't hesitate to help with this too. Monday came, and promptly at noon Arthur walked into the Garden Bistro. It was already his 9th straight visit. The staff had started to have different reactions. Some showed discomfort with the situation. Others, like Tyler, stepped up the mistreatment. "Again?" Tyler said upon seeing him. "Don't you have a home to eat at?" "I do," Arthur replied with his usual calm, "but I like coming here." "Why? To be humiliated?" "No, because the food is good and the place is interesting." Tyler didn't understand the comment, but he didn't pay it any mind either. He led the gentleman to the worst table available, as always, and waited for the order. "Today, I'd like a prime rib with brown gravy, with rice and toasted cassava flour. $68. It was another inflated price, but Arthur paid without blinking. Tyler took the money and, as he walked away, muttered loud enough to be heard, "He probably stole that from someone." A few customers looked on with disapproval, but no one said a thing. The complicity of silence was as cruel as active humiliation. In the kitchen, Dorothy couldn't shake that strange feeling in her chest. The conviction that she knew that gentleman grew stronger every day. She decided to do something she hadn't done in years. She went to the private room where the restaurant's old files were kept, including photos from the grand opening and its early years of operation. The room was locked, but Dorothy knew a maintenance worker who had a copy of the key. She waited until lunch service was over and the kitchen had calmed down, then asked to borrow the key with the excuse that she needed to look up some old recipes. Inside the room, she searched through the dusty boxes until she found a photo album. They were images from opening day, 25 years ago. She herself appeared in a few photos, much younger, in her spotless white uniform with a wide smile. And then she found what she was looking for, a photo of the founder, the man who had opened the Garden Bistro with such pride and dedication. He was cutting the inaugural ribbon, surrounded by elegant guests. His face was younger, without the deep marks of time, but the eyes, they were the same. Dorothy held the photo up close, studying every detail. The shape of the nose, the line of the mouth, the way he positioned his hands. Her heart pounding, she put the photo back in the box and returned to the kitchen. She needed to be sure before doing anything. If she was wrong, she'd look crazy. If she was right, well, the implications were enormous. That afternoon, when Arthur finished his meal and stood up to leave, Dorothy came up with an excuse to step out of the kitchen. She followed him discreetly to the front desk. "Excuse me, sir," she called out softly. Arthur turned, surprised to be approached by someone who wasn't there to humiliate him. "Yes." Dorothy looked into his eyes, searching for confirmation of her suspicions. But before she could ask anything, Gregory appeared out of nowhere. "Dorothy, what are you doing here? The kitchen doesn't run itself." "I was just—" she began. "Get back to your post," Gregory ordered. "Now." Dorothy hesitated for a moment but ultimately obeyed. Gregory stood watching Arthur with a cold smile. "I hope you enjoyed your meal," he said with false cordiality. "I did, thank you," Arthur replied, but his eyes studied the manager with peculiar attention. "Great. Well, see you next time." Arthur left and Gregory stood there for a moment, thinking. That interaction between Dorothy and the old man had been strange. Why had she gone to talk to him? Could it be that the cook was suspecting something? He needed to act fast. That very night, Gregory called Tyler into a private conversation in the office. "Did you notice the cash register has been coming up short?" Gregory asked, cutting straight to the point. "Yes, I noticed," Tyler lied, never paying attention to those kinds of details. "I think I know who's been stealing." Tyler leaned forward, intrigued. "Who?" "That old man who shows up every day. I'm sure he's taking advantage of the busy moments to grab money off the tables, or even from the register, when Madison gets distracted." "Really?" Tyler didn't seem entirely convinced. "Think about it. He shows up out of nowhere, every day at the same time. He's always watching everything, always alert. Doesn't that seem suspicious to you?" It really seemed like a stretch, but Tyler was so caught up in his dislike for the gentleman that he accepted the theory without question. "So what do we do?" "We need proof," Gregory said. "But we also need to make sure that when the owner comes around asking for an explanation about the missing cash, we have someone to blame." "The owner?" Tyler's eyes widened. "I thought he didn't even show up here anymore. You always said he was traveling." "He does travel, but he always comes back. And when he comes back, he'll want to know why the restaurant is losing money." Tyler nodded slowly, understanding the plan. Gregory was creating a smokescreen, a perfect scapegoat to hide his own wrongdoings. But the waiter didn't dwell on that too long. He was more interested in the possibility of finally getting rid of that annoying old man. "I can help," Tyler offered. "I can keep a close eye on him, see if he makes any suspicious moves." "Great. And if you need to, feel free to get creative to make him confess." Tyler smiled. Creativity was something he never lacked, when it came to making someone's life miserable. Over the following days, the pressure on Arthur increased. Tyler began openly accusing him of watching other tables, of planning to rob the customers. He even went as far as patting down the old man's pockets before letting him into the bathroom. "I need to make sure you're not going to steal anything in there," he justified, without a hint of embarrassment. Arthur endured it all without complaining. But his eyes kept watching, studying, mentally noting every detail of Tyler and Gregory's behavior. On the 10th visit, a rainy Wednesday, something different happened. A regular customer, Mrs. Margaret, a 70-year-old woman who had been coming to the Garden Bistro for over a decade, witnessed Tyler purposely dropping a dirty napkin onto Arthur's plate before serving the food. "This is outrageous," she exclaimed, rising from her table. "Young man, how dare you?" Tyler turned around with an expression of fake surprise. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me. I saw you contaminate that gentleman's food. That's a crime." Gregory appeared immediately, his face showing feigned concern. "Mrs. Margaret, there must be some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding at all. I know what I saw. And if you don't handle this situation properly, I'll stop coming here and I'll tell all my friends what kind of establishment this has become." Mrs. Margaret was an influential customer. Her friends represented a significant portion of the restaurant's most affluent clientele. Gregory couldn't afford to lose them. "I'm sure it was an accident," Gregory said in a soft tone. "Tyler, apologize to the gentleman and bring a new plate immediately." Tyler hesitated, his ego bruised by the public reprimand, but he had no choice. "Sorry," he muttered insincerely, picking up the contaminated plate. Arthur, who had watched everything in silence, finally spoke. "No need to apologize if you don't mean it, and you can bring another plate, but this time I'd like to watch the preparation in the kitchen." It was a bold request, completely outside protocol. Gregory was about to refuse when Mrs. Margaret intervened again. "I think that's an excellent idea. After what I saw, I also want to make sure my food is properly prepared." Gregory was cornered. If he refused, he'd confirm Mrs. Margaret's suspicions and risk losing not just her, but her entire network of acquaintances. If he accepted, he'd lose control of the situation. "Of course," he said through clenched teeth. "Dorothy will be happy to show the preparation process." Arthur got up and, accompanied by Mrs. Margaret, who insisted on supervising as well, made his way to the kitchen. Dorothy was preparing 3 dishes simultaneously when she saw them walking in. "What's going on?" she asked, confused. "This gentleman wants to watch his meal being prepared," Gregory explained, "and Mrs. Margaret too." Dorothy looked at Arthur, and for the first time, they exchanged a longer glance. There was recognition there, though unspoken. She was certain now. She knew who he was, and maybe he knew that she knew. "Of course, no problem," Dorothy said with a smile. "It'll be a pleasure." She began preparing Arthur's dish from scratch, explaining each step, showing the quality of the ingredients, the impeccable hygiene. Mrs. Margaret watched attentively, but Arthur, he asked questions, specific questions about suppliers, procedures, protocols that only someone with deep knowledge of the industry could ask. "How do you choose your meat suppliers?" he asked. Dorothy hesitated. That information was normally confidential. "Well, we have a contract with Chicago Prime Provisions. They provide top-quality meat." "And how is the quality inspection done? Do you follow the protocols established at the opening?" Mrs. Dorothy stopped what she was doing. How did he know about the opening protocols? How did he know there were specific protocols established 25 years ago? Honestly, I don't know if those protocols are still followed," she admitted. "A lot has changed in recent years." Arthur nodded as if expecting that answer. And then, with natural movements, he began to observe other details of the kitchen. The organization, the cleanliness, the workflow, all with the eye of someone who deeply understands the subject. Gregory, who had stayed near the kitchen door watching everything, began to feel a growing discomfort. Something was very wrong there. That old man wasn't just an ordinary customer. But who was he really? When the dish was ready, Dorothy served it personally to Arthur, who thanked her kindly. "The food is excellent, as always," he praised. "You're a true professional." Dorothy felt her eyes fill with tears. It had been years since anyone had recognized her work that way. Gregory only complained and demanded more. Tyler and the other waiters treated the kitchen as servants, but that gentleman, mistreated and humiliated, had seen beyond appearances and recognized her dedication. "Thank you, sir," she said in a choked voice. Arthur returned to his table accompanied by Mrs. Margaret, who insisted on sitting with him. "Do you come here every day?" she asked. "Yes, for almost 2 weeks now." "And you always receive this kind of treatment?" "Yes." "Why do you keep coming?" Arthur thought for a moment before answering. "Because sometimes we need to see things from below to understand how they really work." Mrs. Margaret frowned, not fully understanding what he meant, but feeling that there were deeper layers to that statement. "Well, you have my respect," she said, "and if there's any problem again, you can be sure I'll make a point of defending you." "Thank you, ma'am, but it won't be necessary. Everything will be resolved soon." There was something prophetic in those words, something that made Mrs. Margaret feel a shiver down her spine. She finished her own meal, said goodbye to Arthur with a respectful handshake and left, but not before casting a warning look at Gregory. When Arthur finally left, it was already getting dark. He walked slowly along the sidewalk, his hands in the pockets of his worn pants. He stopped in front of a newsstand and bought a copy of the day's paper. He flipped through the pages distractedly until he found the economy section. There, in small but legible letters, was an article about the difficulties faced by traditional restaurants in times of economic crisis. It mentioned some establishments that had closed, others that were in the process of judicial recovery. And it briefly cited the Garden Bistro as an example of longevity in the market, but with mention of possible recent management problems. Arthur folded the newspaper carefully and continued walking. His destination was a small apartment 3 blocks away, a place he had rented temporarily so he could stay close to the restaurant during those 2 weeks. Inside the apartment, he took off his worn shirt and hung it on the back of the chair. He opened the closet, and there, in a separate corner, were completely different clothes. Well-tailored suits, designer shirts, Italian shoes. The clothes of Arthur Sullivan, businessman and founder of the Garden Bistro. He picked up a small notebook he kept on the coffee table and began writing his notes for the day. Already 14 pages of detailed observations about the restaurant's operations, the staff's behavior, the irregularities, the problems. The phone rang. He answered. "Dad?" It was the voice of his daughter, Sarah Sullivan. "How's it going?" "It's going according to plan," he replied, "but it's worse than we imagined." "Is Gregory really skimming money?" "Yes, and that's not all. The treatment of customers is deplorable. The culture there is rotten." Sarah sighed on the other end of the line. "Are you sure you need to keep this up? You already have enough information to confront them." "A few more days," said Arthur. "I want to see how far they're willing to go. I want to be absolutely certain of every accusation I'm going to make." "Just be careful, Dad. You're not as young as you used to be." "I'm fine, sweetheart, don't worry." They talked for a few more minutes about family matters before hanging up. Arthur made himself a simple tea, sat in the armchair by the window, and stared at the city lights. That restaurant had been his dream 25 years ago. He had invested everything he had, worked day and night to make it succeed, and it had. The Garden Bistro had become a benchmark in the region. But then, 10 years ago, he had decided to step back a bit. He left the management in the hands of hired managers, while he took care of other business. He visited occasionally, but always giving notice beforehand. It was 6 months ago that he started receiving anonymous complaints, letters sent to his office reporting mistreatment of customers, embezzlement, corruption in management. He had ignored them at first, thinking it was jealousy or gossip. But the letters kept coming, each one more detailed. Until one of them mentioned Gregory Vance's name specifically, direct accusations of stealing from the cash register. That couldn't be ignored. Arthur had discreetly hired an independent accountant to audit the books, and the result confirmed it. There were significant inconsistencies, but Gregory was clever. The amounts taken were small enough not to draw immediate attention, but large enough to add up to a considerable sum over the months, and he had covered his tracks skillfully, creating fake records of ghost employees and inflated costs from phantom suppliers. However, numbers were only part of the problem. The letters also talked about how customers were treated, about how the work environment had become toxic, and Arthur needed to see it with his own eyes before making any drastic decision. That's how the plan came about. He would disguise himself as a humble customer and see how he would be treated. He would test the true nature of his team when they thought no one important was watching. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The second week of tests began with Arthur returning on Monday as always. Tyler was already waiting for him with a mixed expression of irritation and cruel satisfaction. Gregory had given the green light to step up the pressure, so the waiter was ready. "Well, look who's back," Tyler said loudly, making sure other customers could hear. "The parasite is back." Arthur didn't respond. He simply walked to the hostess stand, where Madison greeted him with a trembling smile. The poor woman was clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation, but she had no power to change anything. "Good morning, sir," she said softly. "Table for one?" "Yes, please." Tyler intercepted before Madison could walk him to a table. "I'll take him," he said, grabbing a menu. "Come with me, old man." He led him to the furthest table possible, practically hidden behind a decorative column. "You can sit here. That way you won't bother the other customers' view." Arthur sat down without complaining. His knees hurt more than the day before. Sleeping on a cheap mattress in the rented apartment wasn't helping his 73-year-old joints. But he had a mission, and he wouldn't give up. He ordered the daily special, paid in advance as usual, and waited. But this time the wait was longer. Half an hour passed. Then 40 minutes. Arthur could see other customers who arrived after him being served, while his plate simply never showed up. Finally, after 50 minutes, Tyler came out with the food, but when he set the plate on the table, it was obvious the food had been reheated. It had been prepared a long time ago and deliberately left to cool. "Sorry for the wait," Tyler said with no hint of apology in his voice. The kitchen was backed up. Arthur looked at the plate. The rice was clumped together, the meat as tough as shoe leather, the vegetables wilted. It was inedible, but he picked up his utensils and started eating anyway, chewing the rubbery meat with difficulty. Tyler stood there watching with a satisfied smile. He expected the old man to finally complain, to give him a reason to kick him out for good. But Arthur simply ate in silence, every bite requiring effort. Back in the kitchen, Dorothy had noticed what Tyler did. She had prepared that plate almost an hour ago and told the waiter it was ready. But he had deliberately ignored it, letting the food sit until it turned bad. "Tyler," she called when he came back to pick up other orders. "Why did you let his food get cold?" "I forgot," he lied shamelessly. "You didn't forget anything. You did it on purpose." Tyler stepped closer to her with a threatening look. "So what? What are you going to do about it? Tell Gregory? He already knows and he approves. Or do you think you'll get anywhere by complaining?" Dorothy clenched her fists but didn't answer. He was right. Complaining wouldn't do any good. Gregory not only knew, he encouraged it. And she needed that job. Her daughters depended on her. But still something inside her rebelled. That wasn't how things used to be. When the restaurant first opened, Arthur Sullivan himself had gathered the entire staff and said clearly, "We will treat every customer as if they were the most important one, no matter how much money they spend or how they're dressed. Dignity has no price." She never forgot those words, and now she could see how far the place had strayed from that founding principle. That afternoon after Arthur left, Gregory called Tyler into another meeting in the office. "How's the operation going?" he asked. "Good. The old man keeps coming back, but I'm making it clear he's not welcome." "Great. But now we need to take the next step." Tyler leaned forward, curious. "What step?" Gregory opened a drawer and pulled out a $50 bill. "I want you to plant this in his coat tomorrow." "Plant it? Why?" "Because we're going to accuse him of theft. We'll say he took money from a customer's table. You'll be the witness, and when he's forced to empty his pockets, we'll find this bill." Tyler hesitated. One thing was being rude and cruel with words and actions. Something entirely different was fabricating evidence of a crime. I don't know, Gregory. Isn't that going too far? Too far? Gregory laughed. You think he'll have any way to prove it wasn't him? A lonely old man against the word of the manager and an employee? Be realistic. But what if he complains? What if he sues? With what money? Look at him. He barely has enough money to eat. There's no way he'll be able to afford a lawyer. Tyler still seemed uncertain, but Gregory played another card. By the way, I want to talk to you about your position here at the restaurant. I've been thinking about promoting you to floor supervisor. With a salary increase, of course. Tyler's eyes lit up. Supervisor. A position with more status, more money, more power. Really? Of course, but I need to know I can count on you. That you're really part of the team. Tyler understood the implicit message. If he wanted the promotion, he'd have to get his hands dirty. All right, he finally agreed. I'll do it. Great. Tomorrow then. Let's put an end to this problem once and for all. The next day, Tuesday, Arthur arrived as usual at noon. The restaurant was reasonably full, with about half the tables occupied. He was led to a table near the window, which was unusual. Normally, Tyler seated him in the worst spots. Arthur found it strange but didn't comment. He placed his order, paid, and waited. Tyler went to the kitchen, but instead of passing the order on to Dorothy right away, he made a strategic pause. He went to the coat rack near the kitchen entrance, where Arthur had hung his worn-out jacket. He looked around to make sure no one was watching, reached into the pocket and felt money. His heart raced. There really was money in the old man's coat pocket, not just the $50 bill he was going to plant, but several other bills. Tyler stopped, confused. That wasn't in the script. Gregory had told him to plant the money, but there was already money there. What did that mean? Could it be that the old man was actually stealing? For a moment, Tyler hesitated, but then he decided to follow the original plan. He placed the $50 bill on top of the others and went back to the dining room. 15 minutes later, when Arthur's food was almost ready, Tyler set the scene. He approached a table where a middle-aged couple was finishing dessert and whispered something to them, discreetly pointing at Arthur. The couple looked at the old man and shook their heads. No, they hadn't seen anyone touch anything at their tables. Tyler insisted, saying he was sure he'd seen something. The couple began checking their purses and wallets. "Oh my God!" the woman exclaimed. $50 are missing from my wallet." Tyler feigned surprise and concern. "I knew it. I saw that man over there," he pointed at Arthur, "passing very close to your table. I thought it was strange at the time." "Are you accusing that man of theft?" the husband asked in disbelief. "I'm not accusing. I'm just reporting what I saw, but of course, if you'd like to check—" Gregory appeared as if he'd been summoned, but in truth he was waiting for the right moment. "What's going on here?" "Gregory," Tyler said with a worried voice, "this lady is saying that $50 are missing from her wallet, and I saw that man in the worn-out clothes passing near their table a few minutes ago." Gregory made a calculated expression of shock. "That's very serious. Sir," he called out, addressing Arthur, who was watching everything calmly, "I need you to come here, please." Arthur stood up and walked over to where the small group was forming. Other customers started paying attention to the commotion. "They're accusing you of taking money from this lady's wallet," Gregory said, his tone of voice perfectly balanced between authority and concern. "I didn't take anyone's money," Arthur replied calmly. "Then you don't mind showing what's in your pockets?" It was Madison, from the front desk, who protested first. "Gregory, this isn't right. You can't force a customer to—" "Madison, quiet," he cut her off sharply. "This is a serious matter." Then he turned to Arthur. "Well, sir, if you have nothing to hide, it doesn't cost anything to show." Arthur took a deep breath. He knew exactly what was happening. It was a setup, but he also knew he had to play the game to the end to see exactly how far those people were willing to go. "All right," he agreed. "I'll show you." He emptied his pants pockets. A small old wallet, some coins, a cloth handkerchief, nothing else. "And the coat?" Tyler insisted. "The coat is hanging over there." Tyler went to get the coat himself. He brought it over where everyone could see and, theatrically, reached into the pocket. When he pulled his hand out, he was holding a wad of bills. There were 20s, 50s, and hundreds. "Well, well, look what we have here," Tyler said with fake surprise. "For someone who can barely afford to eat, that's a lot of money." The couple at the table looked at the money and the woman pointed. "That 50, that's mine. I know because I folded the corner this morning." It was a lie. She hadn't done any such thing, but Tyler had suggested she say that to strengthen the accusation. Arthur looked at the money, then at Tyler, then at Gregory, and for the first time in 2 weeks a small smile appeared on his lips. It wasn't a smile of nervousness or shame. It was the smile of someone who had just seen the last piece of the puzzle click into place. "That money is mine," he said calmly. "All of it." "How can you prove that?" Gregory challenged. "I can't, but you can't prove it isn't either." "This lady just confirmed that bill is hers," Tyler insisted. "She said she folded the corner of the bill, but when you pulled it from my pocket, the bill had no fold at all." Arthur picked up the 50 and showed it to everyone. "See? It's completely smooth." The couple looked uncomfortable. The woman had indeed told an obvious lie that was now being exposed. "Maybe she got confused," Tyler tried, "but that doesn't change the fact that you have far more money than you let on." "And since when is having money a crime?" asked a woman's voice from the entrance of the restaurant. Everyone turned. It was Mrs. Margaret, the customer who had defended Arthur days earlier. She had walked in right at the moment of the accusation and heard everything. "Mrs. Margaret," Gregory said, forcing a smile, "this doesn't concern—" "It does concern me. I've been a customer of this establishment for over 10 years, and I've never seen such dishonesty. You're clearly setting up a situation to frame this man." "Nobody's setting anything up," Tyler defended himself. "No? Then explain how you knew exactly where to look. How did you know there was money in his coat if no one saw this gentleman put anything in or take anything out of it?" Tyler opened his mouth, but couldn't come up with a quick answer. Gregory tried to intervene. "Tyler is very observant. He notices things." "Observant or an accomplice?" Mrs. Margaret crossed her arms. "Because it seems to me that the two of you are working together to put on this charade." The situation was spiraling out of control. Gregory realized he needed to back off before other customers started questioning things too. "All right," he said, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Maybe we got ahead of ourselves. It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Mrs. Margaret repeated sarcastically. "Interesting how all the misunderstandings here always seem to hurt the same person." She approached Arthur and said in a clear voice, "Sir, if you wish to file a formal complaint about the conduct of this establishment, I would be honored to serve as a witness." Arthur looked at her with genuine gratitude. "I thank you from the bottom of my heart, Mrs. Margaret, but that won't be necessary. As I said before, everything will resolve itself very soon." There was something in the way he said it, a quiet conviction that made even Gregory feel a chill of apprehension. The manager decided to put an end to the matter. "There, it's settled. Everyone can go back to their tables. And sir," he addressed Arthur, "your food should be ready now. Tyler, please serve the customer." Tyler, still holding the stack of cash, reluctantly handed it back to Arthur. But before doing so, he managed to discreetly remove the $50 bill he himself had planted. He couldn't leave that evidence behind. Arthur accepted the money back and returned to his table. The food was served, this time still hot and properly prepared, because Dorothy had insisted on remaking it when she saw how much time had passed. When he finally finished and stood up to leave, the entire restaurant seemed to be under a heavy silence. Everyone had witnessed something uncomfortable, a blatant attempt at injustice. Madison at the reception desk whispered as he passed, "I'm so sorry about what happened, sir." "Don't worry, dear," Arthur replied kindly. "You're a good person. Stay that way." He walked out and the door closed behind him. Gregory and Tyler exchanged glances, both feeling that something had gone very wrong. The plan had failed not only to get rid of the old man, but it had exposed their malicious intentions to several customers. That night, Gregory stayed in the office late, going over the day's events. He was losing control of the situation. That damn old man was becoming a bigger problem than he had imagined. and now he had Mrs. Margaret actively defending him. He needed to come up with something different, something more definitive. And then he had an idea. What if he simply banned the man from entering? He would use the argument that the man was causing problems, disturbing other customers. It was a private establishment. He had the right to refuse service. Satisfied with the plan, Gregory went home. The next day, he would put it all into action. But what he didn't know was that Arthur, that very same night, was in his rented apartment, writing a detailed report about everything that had happened, including the attempted setup, and he was doing it with the help of his daughter Sarah, who was a lawyer specializing in corporate law. "This is sufficient evidence, Dad," Sarah said, reading the notes. "You have a solid case to not only fire Gregory, but also sue him for embezzlement and defamation." "Not yet," Arthur replied. "2 more days. I want to see how they react after what happened today." "You're taking a big risk." "I'm testing my limits," he admitted, "and I'm also testing theirs. I need to know who on my team is still worth keeping. Dorothy, for example. She's been the only one maintaining quality standards even under pressure. And that young woman at the reception? Madison. She's also showing integrity. She's afraid of losing her job, but she still tries to do the right thing when she can. And the others," Arthur sighed. "The others, well, we'll see." On Wednesday morning, when Arthur arrived at the Garden Bistro, he was greeted at the door by Gregory personally. "Sir, I regret to inform you that we can no longer serve you," the manager said with fake politeness. "Why not?" "Because your presence has been causing discomfort to other customers, and as a private establishment, we have the right to choose whom we serve." Arthur had expected exactly that. "I see. And is this official? Am I being formally banned from entering?" "Yes." "Even though I have money to pay and have never caused any real problem?" "Even so." Arthur nodded slowly. "Very well, then I suppose I no longer need to come in every day." "Exactly." "Great." Arthur took a step back and pulled a business card from his pocket. He handed it to Gregory. "In that case, I'll need you to be at the corporate headquarters office tomorrow at 10 in the morning for a meeting with the owner." Gregory took the card automatically before processing what he was reading. It was an elegant card, made of high-quality paper with gold lettering. It read, "Arthur Sullivan, founder and CEO. The Garden Bistro Restaurants." Gregory's world stopped. He looked from the card to the man in worn-out clothes before him, then back to the card. His face went pale dramatically. "What?" His voice came out as a strangled whisper. "You are—" "Yes," Arthur confirmed calmly. "I'm the owner. And after 2 weeks watching how you run my restaurant, how you treat customers and staff, I have quite a bit to discuss with you tomorrow." Tyler had overheard the conversation and approached, confused. When he saw the card in Gregory's trembling hand, he understood immediately. His face went from white to red, then back to white. "Mr. Sullivan, we had no idea," Tyler began, but Arthur cut him off. "Exactly, you had no idea. And that's precisely why you acted the way you truly are. You showed your true character when you thought no one important was watching." Madison, who had heard everything from the hostess stand, had her hands over her mouth, tears in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from a mix of shock and relief. Finally, someone had seen. Someone who could do something about it had witnessed everything. Dorothy came out of the kitchen, drawn by the commotion. When she saw Arthur and understood what was happening, a slow smile spread across her face. She had been right. She knew there was something special about that man. She had recognized the founder despite the years and the disguise. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, approaching, "it's an honor to have you back." "Dorothy," Arthur greeted her with a warm smile. "You were one of the few good things I found here in these 2 weeks. Your dedication to quality, even under adverse circumstances, did not go unnoticed." The tears Dorothy had held back for so long finally came down. They weren't tears of sadness, but of validation. Someone had seen her effort. Someone important had acknowledged it. Gregory was still in shock, but he was beginning to recover. His brain was already working on possible excuses, justifications, ways to get out of that situation. "Mr. Sullivan, please let me explain. I was just—" Tomorrow, Gregory. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock you'll have your chance to explain. Also bring all the financial records from the last 6 months. We'll need to review some numbers. Arthur's voice was calm but firm, making it clear there was no room for negotiation. Arthur looked around the dining room, where all the customers and employees watched the scene in stunned silence. He walked slowly to the center of the space and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "My name is Arthur Sullivan. I am the founder and owner of this restaurant. I apologize to all the customers who may have witnessed unpleasant scenes in recent days. I want you to know that this does not represent the values upon which this establishment was built, and in the coming days, measures will be taken to restore the dignity and respect that should permeate this place." A heavy silence hung for a moment before someone began to clap. It was Mrs. Margaret, who had walked in during the speech. Other customers joined her, and soon the entire restaurant was applauding. Gregory wanted to disappear. Tyler wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. But there was no escape. They had been exposed in the most public and humiliating way possible. Arthur thanked them with a nod and turned to leave. But before crossing the door, he stopped and looked back one last time. "Oh, and Tyler," he called, "you should also attend tomorrow's meeting. You and any other employee who actively took part in the situations I witnessed." Tyler could barely nod, his throat too tight to speak. And then Arthur Sullivan walked out of the restaurant for the last time as a man in worn-out clothes. The next time he walked through those doors, it would be as what he truly was, the owner. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us folks who are just starting out. Now continuing. That night, Gregory Vance couldn't sleep. He was lying in bed in his comfortable apartment, bought with the inflated salary he earned as manager plus the money he had embezzled over the years, thinking of every possible way to defend himself. But no matter how hard he tried to build an acceptable narrative, he knew he was doomed. Arthur had witnessed everything firsthand. There was no way to deny or twist the facts. Around 3 in the morning, he considered simply not showing up to the meeting, grabbing his things and disappearing. But that would be admitting guilt and possibly making the legal consequences worse. Maybe, just maybe, if he went and showed genuine remorse, he could get out of it with less damage. Tyler was in a similar situation. Sitting in the small kitchen of the apartment he shared with 2 roommates, he held a cold cup of coffee as the night wore on. His head throbbed with the realization of how stupid he had been. How had he let his ego and his needless cruelty destroy what could have been a promising career? He thought about his family in the Hamptons. His mother, who was so proud to say her son worked at a famous restaurant in New York. His father, who always stressed the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their position. How had he become the exact opposite of what his parents had tried to teach him? Tyler picked up his phone and opened his photo gallery. There was a picture of him from the day he was hired at the Garden Bistro 3 years ago. He looked younger, more innocent, with a genuine smile and eyes full of hope. What had happened in the meantime? When had he become this bitter, cruel person? The truth, he knew, was that it hadn't been sudden. It was gradual. It started with small, sarcastic comments that made his co-workers laugh. It evolved into a poorly concealed contempt for customers he deemed inferior. And it culminated with Gregory's toxic influence, who not only allowed but encouraged that behavior. But none of that mattered now. He had made his choices, and he would have to face the consequences. Meanwhile, in a distant neighborhood, Madison Sawyer was sitting on the couch in the small house where she lived with her mother and 2 younger brothers. Her mother, Mrs. Susan, worked as a cleaning lady and had sacrificed so much so Madison could study and get a better job. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Mrs. Susan asked, sitting down next to her. "You haven't gone to sleep yet?" "Mom, something happened at work today." Madison told her everything. The 2 weeks witnessing the systematic humiliation of the elderly man, her own powerlessness to help him, the shocking revelation that he had been the owner all along. "Oh my God," Mrs. Susan whispered when her daughter finished. "What now?" "I don't know, Mom. I'm afraid of losing my job. But at the same time, I'm relieved that someone finally saw what was happening there." "Did you do anything wrong, sweetheart?" "No. I never treated anyone badly, but I also couldn't stop the others. You tried, and you almost got fired for it. You can't blame yourself for not having the power to change an entire system on your own." Madison rested her head on her mother's shoulder. "I hope Mr. Sullivan sees it that way too." Across town, in a spacious, elegant apartment in Greenwich Village, Sarah Sullivan was preparing documents while her father sat in a leather armchair reading his notes from the past 2 weeks. "Dad, are you sure you want to do the meeting tomorrow already? We could wait a few more days to prepare the case better." "No," Arthur replied firmly. "The longer we wait, the more chance they have to destroy evidence or come up with elaborate excuses. I need to confront them while they're still in shock." "And what about the criminal side? The misappropriation of funds is significant. Gregory could end up facing legal proceedings. Let's see how he behaves tomorrow. If there's genuine remorse and a willingness to do the right thing, maybe we can resolve this without involving the authorities. But if he lies or tries to manipulate me, then there'll be no mercy?" "It's not about mercy, Sarah. It's about justice. If I let it slide, I'm saying that kind of behavior is acceptable, and it isn't." Sarah closed the folder she had been organizing and looked at her father. "You know you might have lost a lot of money over this, right? If you had acted sooner, the losses would have been smaller." "Money can be recovered," said Arthur, "but I needed to understand the full scope of the problem. I needed to see with my own eyes how things had deteriorated, and now I know." "And what are you going to do with the restaurant afterward?" "I'm going to rebuild it. I'm going back to the principles that made me open it 25 years ago. Dignity, respect, quality. Not just in the food, but in every human interaction that happens within those walls." Sarah smiled. "You're too old for this, Dad. You should be retired, enjoying life." "I'm 73, not a walking corpse," Arthur shot back with a smile. "And besides, this isn't work, it's redemption. It's going back to my roots. It's remembering why I started all of this in the first place." Father and daughter kept working late into the night, preparing everything for the meeting the next day. Arthur had a detailed list of every irregularity he had witnessed, every time he had been humiliated, every failure in service and management. But he also had a list of good things: Dorothy's dedication, Madison's kindness, a few other employees who had shown discomfort with the situation. At 9 o'clock on Thursday morning, Gregory Vance parked his car in front of the office building that housed the central headquarters of the Garden Bistro chain. There were only 3 restaurants in total, the original in the Upper East Side, a second in Miami Beach and a third in Jersey City, but the central headquarters was where all the important decisions were made. Gregory had been there only twice in 5 years. Usually all communication was done by email or phone. Seeing the place in person now, about to be confronted, made everything feel more real and more frightening. He took the elevator up to the 10th floor and was greeted by the secretary, a middle-aged woman with a serious expression. "Mr. Vance, Mr. Sullivan is waiting in the conference room. Please follow me." She led him down a hallway decorated with old photographs of the restaurants, framed newspaper articles about awards received, quality certificates. It was a hallway that celebrated the history and success of the establishment, and Gregory, walking through it, felt the weight of his betrayal of all of it. The door to the conference room opened, and there stood Arthur Sullivan. But he was no longer the man in worn-out clothes with a humble posture. He was impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit, a white linen shirt, and a discreet silk tie. His grey hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed. On the index finger of his right hand gleamed a gold ring. On his left wrist a Swiss watch. He was the perfect image of the successful businessman he truly was. Beside him stood Sarah, equally elegant in a grey women's suit, with a folder of documents in front of her on the polished mahogany table. "Gregory," Arthur greeted, his voice firm but not hostile. "Please, have a seat." Gregory obeyed, his legs barely carrying him to the chair. His hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the table. "Before we begin," said Arthur, "I need to introduce my daughter, Sarah Sullivan. She's a lawyer and will be present at this meeting as an observer and legal advisor." Gregory swallowed hard and nodded towards Sarah, who returned the gesture with a neutral, professional look. "Gregory, I'd like to start by giving you the opportunity to speak," Arthur continued. Tell me, from your perspective, how your management of the Garden Bistro in the Upper East Side has been over the past 5 years. It was a trap question, and Gregory knew it. Anything he said could be used against him, but it was also a chance to show some genuine remorse. "Mr. Sullivan," he began, his voice wavering, I have no excuses for what you witnessed over the past 2 weeks. It was deplorable. It was inhumane. And I take full responsibility for having created an environment where that kind of behavior not only existed, but was encouraged. Arthur said nothing, just nodded for him to continue. "When I took over as manager 5 years ago, the restaurant was doing well. We had a good reputation, good staff, loyal customers. But I let the power go to my head. I started thinking I knew more than I actually did, that I could do things my own way without consequences." "And what about the financial discrepancies?" asked Sarah, her first intervention. Gregory turned even paler. "Yes, I embezzled money. It wasn't much at a time, but over the years, it added up." "How much exactly?" Sarah pressed. I don't have the exact number, but if I had to estimate, maybe $50,000–$60,000 over the years." Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a document. "Our independent audit found discrepancies of approximately $82,000 over the past 3 years. That's significantly different from your estimate." Gregory hung his head. "Then I embezzled more than I thought. I wasn't keeping exact records precisely because I knew it was wrong." "Why did you do it, Gregory?" asked Arthur, his voice carrying genuine curiosity. "The salary you earned as manager was generous, well above the market average. Why did you need to steal on top of that?" "Greed," Gregory admitted simply. "Envy, too. I watched wealthy customers walk in every day, spending on one meal what I made in a week of work, and I wanted what they had. I wanted the bigger apartment, the newer car, the designer clothes. The salary wasn't enough for the lifestyle I aspired to. So you stole from my business, from decades of my work, to support a lifestyle you couldn't afford to sustain honestly." "Yes, sir, and I know there's no excuse. I know what I did was criminal, and if you want to press charges, I won't fight it." Arthur remained silent for a long moment, studying the man before him. Was there remorse there, or just fear of the consequences? "And what about the way you encouraged the treatment of customers who didn't fit your standard of acceptable?" Arthur continued. "How did that situation with me happen?" Gregory took a deep breath. "It started subtly. A comment here, a complaint there, about customers who didn't belong. I justified it by telling myself I was protecting the restaurant's image, maintaining a certain standard. But the truth is I was being elitist, prejudiced, and cruel. Do you realize that your behavior wasn't just immoral, but also illegal? Discrimination based on appearance is prohibited by law. You could have been sued if I were just an ordinary customer." "Yes, sir. I realize that now. Back then I convinced myself I was just doing my job, but it was a lie I told myself." Sarah intervened again. "And the attempt to frame my father yesterday, planting money in his coat and accusing him of theft, how do you justify that?" Gregory closed his eyes as if the memory were too painful. "I was desperate. I knew the financial discrepancies would eventually be discovered, and I thought that if I could create an alternative culprit, a scapegoat, I could save myself. It was despicable, it was cowardly, and it almost ruined an innocent man's life just to save my own skin." "You understand this is a serious crime, right?" said Sarah. "Falsifying evidence, attempted false incrimination. These are crimes that could lead to prison." "Yes, ma'am, I understand." Arthur stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. The Statue of Liberty was visible in the distance, its arms open over the city. He stood there for a while, just observing, while Gregory waited in silent agony. Finally, Arthur turned around. "Gregory, I'm going to be honest with you. Part of me wants to press charges, wants to make sure you face legal consequences for everything you've done. It would be fair, it would be deserved." Gregory nodded, prepared to accept his fate. "But," Arthur continued, Another part of me wonders what would actually be accomplished by that. You'd go to prison? Maybe. Your life would be ruined, certainly. But would that really solve the problem? Would it teach any useful lesson? I don't understand, sir. What I mean is that I'd rather focus on restoring what was damaged than on punishing the one who damaged it. But that doesn't mean you'll walk away unscathed. Arthur returned to the table and sat down. Here's what's going to happen. First, you're effectively fired immediately. You will no longer work at the Garden Bistro or any establishment associated with me. Gregory nodded, expecting that. Second, you're going to pay back every dollar you embezzled, the full $82,000. You have 6 months to do it. If you don't have the full amount, we'll set up a payment plan, but it will be paid. Yes, sir. I'll sell my car, I'll cut my expenses, I'll pay. Third, you're going to write a formal apology letter to every employee who worked under your toxic management. And you're going to publish a public apology on the restaurant's website, explaining your actions without making excuses or trying to minimize the severity. Gregory's eyes widened. Public humiliation was almost worse than legal consequences. All right, I'll do it. And fourth, Arthur leaned forward, you're going to spend the next 6 months doing volunteer work at an organization that helps people in vulnerable situations. I want you to learn firsthand that human dignity doesn't depend on a bank account or expensive clothes. It was a creative sentence, and, in a way, more challenging than simply paying a fine or serving time. If you do all of this, Arthur concluded, I won't press criminal charges. I'll consider the case closed from a legal standpoint, but if you fail on any of these points, or if I find out you're just going through the motions without actually learning anything, then I'll use the full weight of the law against you, understood? Yes, sir, and thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve. I'm not doing this for you, said Arthur. I'm doing it because I believe people can change, and because I want you to be a living example that redemption is possible when there's genuine effort. Sarah slid a document across the table. This is the formal agreement, with all the terms my father just described. Read it carefully and sign if you agree. Gregory picked up the document with trembling hands and read every word. It was exactly as Arthur had said, with no hidden traps or extra clauses. When he finished, he took the pen Sarah offered and signed his name. Great, said Arthur. Now you can go. But first I need all of your keys to the restaurant and any other items that belong to the establishment. Gregory emptied his pockets, handing over a set of keys, an ID badge, and a corporate card. One more thing, said Arthur as Gregory was about to leave. If any future employer calls me asking for references about you, I'll be honest. I'll tell them exactly what happened, but I'll also tell them how you handled the consequences. Your future reputation depends on how you honor this agreement. Understood? Yes, sir, I understand. And again, thank you. Gregory left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. When the door closed, Sarah looked at her father. Do you think he'll honor it? I don't know, Arthur admitted, but I gave him a chance. The rest is up to him. And if he doesn't? Then we'll sue with everything we've got. But I'd rather believe he will, because the alternative is admitting that some people can't be redeemed, and I don't like that idea. Half an hour later, it was Tyler Sterling's turn to enter the meeting room. He was even more nervous than Gregory, his red eyes suggesting he'd been crying recently. Arthur repeated the same process. He offered Tyler the chance to speak, to explain his actions, and the young waiter, to his credit, didn't try to shift the blame. I was cruel because it made me feel powerful, Tyler admitted, his voice breaking. I spent my whole life feeling inferior, like I wasn't good enough, and when I discovered I could make other people feel small, it gave me a sense of control I'd never had before. And didn't you think about the people you were hurting? Asked Arthur. I did, yes, but I convinced myself they didn't matter, that they were less human than me, but they weren't. They aren't, and I have no excuse for what I did. Arthur studied the young man for a long moment. Tyler was younger, 28 years old. There was still time for genuine change. Tyler, you have a choice, said Arthur. I can fire you right now, give you a terrible reference, and make sure you never work in a decent restaurant again. Tyler nodded, expecting exactly that. Or, Arthur continued, I can offer you a chance at redemption, but it will be hard. Harder than simply walking away and forgetting all of this. Tyler looked up, confused. A chance? Yes. I'm transferring you to the kitchen as an assistant. You'll work under the direct supervision of Mrs. Dorothy. You'll learn from the ground up, washing dishes, prepping ingredients, cleaning surfaces. You'll earn a kitchen assistant starting wage, which is significantly less than what you make as a waiter. Tyler didn't know what to say. You'll do this for 6 months, Arthur continued. During that time, you'll also attend weekly counseling sessions with me, where we'll discuss empathy, respect, and human dignity. If at the end of 6 months you show genuine growth and real change in attitude, I'll consider moving you back to the front of the house. But it will be a complete fresh start, understood? But why? Asked Tyler, tears streaming down his face. Why give me a chance after everything I've done? Because you're young. Because I believe your behavior was largely influenced by Gregory and the toxic culture he created. And because everyone deserves a second chance, as long as they're truly willing to work for it. Tyler wiped his tears with the back of his hand. I accept. I'll do everything you're asking. I'll work hard, I'll learn, I'll change. I promise. Promises are easy, Tyler. I'll judge you by your actions, not your words. I understand, and thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Sarah also had a document for Tyler to sign, formalizing the terms. When he signed, Arthur gave one more instruction. You start Monday. Arrive at 6 in the morning to help with prep, and Tyler, wear simple, comfortable clothes. You're going to sweat a lot. Yes, sir. When Tyler left, Sarah looked at her father with admiration. You're more forgiving than I would be. It's not forgiveness, daughter, it's investment. I'm betting there's something good in that young man that can be cultivated. I could be wrong, but I'd rather try and fail than not try and regret it. The rest of the day was dedicated to meetings with individual employees. Madison was called in and, to her relief, was not reprimanded, but praised for her integrity under difficult circumstances. Arthur offered her a raise and the position of customer service supervisor, with the responsibility of helping rebuild the restaurant's culture. Dorothy was promoted to head chef with full autonomy to hire and train her team. Arthur also substantially increased her salary and offered a retroactive bonus for her years of dedicated service. Mr. Sullivan, said Dorothy with tears in her eyes, I knew it was you from the 3rd day. I recognized the way you held the silverware. It was exactly how you taught me 25 years ago. And why didn't you say anything? Because I realized you were there for a reason. You were testing, observing, and I didn't want to get in the way of that. I wanted you to see the truth for yourself. You are wise, Dorothy. You always were, and I'm glad you stood firm to your principles even when it was difficult. Arthur also met with other employees, some of whom were warned for having passively participated in the humiliations or for failing to maintain quality standards, but no one besides Gregory was fired. Everyone was given the chance to improve. On Friday, Arthur announced a general meeting with all the employees of the Garden Bistro in the Upper East Side. It was the first official step toward rebuilding the restaurant's culture. The dining room was full, all the waiters, assistants, kitchen staff, cleaning crew and reception staff. About 30 people in total, all nervous, not knowing what to expect. Arthur walked in dressed casually, jeans and a button-down shirt, nothing too formal. He wanted it to feel like a conversation, not a lecture. Good morning, everyone, he began. For those who don't know me personally, my name is Arthur Sullivan. I founded this restaurant 25 years ago. Murmurs spread through the room. Many of the newer employees had never seen the owner in person. You may have heard about the events of last week, about how I spent 2 weeks here disguised as a humble customer, and about what I discovered during that time. The silence was absolute. I'm not going to lie to you. What I found was disappointing. The culture of this place had become toxic. Customers were being mistreated. Employees were being pressured to act in ways that contradicted their values. And all of this was happening under my name, representing my business. He paused, letting the words sink in. But here's the thing. I don't blame all of you. Most of the responsibility falls on management, on Gregory, who created and encouraged this culture, and on me for distancing myself so much that I didn't notice what was happening. Some employees looked surprised. They didn't expect the owner to take any blame. So here's what's going to happen from now on. We're going to start over. We're going to get back to the core values that made this restaurant successful in the first place: respect, dignity, quality, and humanity. Arthur walked over to a board he had prepared and wrote 4 words: respect, dignity, quality, humanity. These are our pillars, he said. And each of you from now on will be evaluated not only by your technical competence, but by how you embody these values in your day-to-day work. He turned to face the team. Let me be clear about what that means. Respect means treating every person, client, or colleague with the consideration you'd like to receive. It doesn't matter how they're dressed. It doesn't matter how much money they have. Every human being deserves to be treated with basic respect. He nodded his head, and a few employees followed along. Dignity means preserving not only your own, but also that of others. Not humiliating, not diminishing, not making anyone feel less human for any reason. He wrote examples below each word. Quality means doing your job well. Every dish, every service, every interaction, doing it with excellence because you care, not because you're being watched. And humanity, he paused on this word, means remembering that everyone here, including me, is a fallible human being. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have bad days. But we can choose how we respond to that. We can choose to be compassionate. We can choose to learn and grow. Arthur put down the marker and returned to the front of the board. There will be practical changes too. We're going to implement regular training on customer service and team dynamics. We're going to create an anonymous channel where you can report problems without fear of retaliation. We're going to have monthly meetings where everyone can voice concerns and suggestions. Dorothy, from the kitchen, timidly raised her hand. Yes, Dorothy? Mr. Sullivan, what happens if someone doesn't follow these values? How do we handle that? Good question. The answer is it depends. An isolated mistake, especially if it's acknowledged and corrected, will be met with guidance and support. But patterns of problematic behavior, especially if they involve deliberate disrespect or cruelty, will result in more serious measures, including possible termination. He looked around the room. But I don't want you to see this as a threat. I want you to see it as a promise. The promise that this will be a place where good people can do good work and be valued for it. Madison also raised her hand. Yes, Madison. What do we do if a client is rude or difficult? Do we still have to maintain respect, even if they don't do the same? Arthur smiled. It was a legitimate question. Excellent question. Yes, we should always start with respect. But respect doesn't mean accepting abuse. If a client is genuinely abusive, verbally or physically, you have not just the right but the obligation to protect yourselves. Call a manager, call me if I'm here, and we'll handle the situation. No one here should tolerate true abuse. He continued, but we're also going to train you to distinguish between a difficult client and an abusive client. Someone who complains about the food because it isn't good is a difficult client, and we should listen and make it right. Someone who yells, insults, or threatens is abusive, and we won't tolerate that. The meeting continued for another hour, with Arthur answering questions, listening to concerns, and slowly building trust with his team. At the end, he made an announcement. To celebrate this new beginning, I'm giving each of you a bonus of $1,000. It's not to buy your silence or your loyalty. It's simply recognition that you've been through a difficult period under bad management, and you deserve something good. There was a collective gasp of surprise and gratitude. And one more thing, Arthur continued. From now on, I'll be much more present. Not just supervising from afar, but here at the restaurant regularly. I'll eat here, I'll talk to you, I'll observe, because I learned the hard way that a business only works when the owner is attentive and involved. When the meeting ended, the employees left with a mix of emotions. There was relief that Gregory was gone, hope with the promised changes, but also apprehension about the future. Change, even positive, always brings discomfort. In the following days, the garden bistro underwent a visible transformation. Arthur hired a new manager, someone with proven experience not only in administration, but in ethical leadership. Mark Fletcher was 45 years old, had worked at several renowned restaurants, and had impeccable references regarding how he treated both employees and customers. "Mark, do you understand what I'm trying to build here?" Arthur asked during the interview. "Yes, sir. A place where excellence in food goes hand in hand with excellence in humanity." "So exactly. And do you think you can help with that?" "I certainly can. In fact, it's exactly the kind of place I've always wanted to work." Mark started in less than a week, and his presence brought a completely different energy. He greeted every employee by name. He asked about their families. He offered help when someone was overwhelmed. And crucially, he never tolerated any disrespectful behavior. Tyler started his work in the kitchen the following Monday. He arrived at 6 in the morning as instructed, wearing simple clothes. Dorothy received him with a firm but not hostile look. "Good morning, Tyler. Ready to work?" "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am, Dorothy is fine. And the first thing you're going to learn here is that there are no small or unworthy tasks. Everything we do matters, from washing a head of lettuce to finishing a complex dish. Understood?" "Understood." And so Tyler began his journey of redemption. In the first few days it was humiliating. He who had been a relatively important waiter was now washing dirty dishes, peeling potatoes, cleaning surfaces. His kitchen co-workers, who had witnessed his cruel behavior, didn't make things easy. They weren't openly hostile, but they weren't friendly either. But Tyler didn't complain. He worked in silence, did what was asked of him, stayed after hours when necessary. And slowly, very slowly, he began to understand something fundamental. Every person in that kitchen, regardless of their position, was essential. The restaurant didn't function without the guy who washed the dishes. It didn't function without the person who chopped the vegetables. It was an ecosystem, and he had to learn his place in it. The weekly sessions with Arthur were equally challenging. They sat in the office every Friday afternoon, and Arthur asked difficult questions. "Tyler, tell me about a situation this week where you had the chance to be kind. How did you handle it? Why do you think you felt pleasure in humiliating that old man who was me? When you see someone different from you now, what's your first thought?" At first, Tyler gave answers he thought Arthur wanted to hear, but the old businessman was too experienced to be fooled. "Don't tell me what you think I want to hear," Arthur said once. "Tell me the truth, even if it's ugly. We can only work with honesty." And so Tyler began to be truly honest. He admitted that he still felt traces of prejudice. He admitted that it was hard to change a lifetime of thought patterns. He admitted that there were days when he didn't want to be there, when he resented having been demoted. "That's normal," said Arthur. "Real change doesn't happen overnight, but the fact that you're aware of it, that you're fighting against those impulses, is already enormous progress." Meanwhile, the restaurant began to regain its reputation. News about the transformation spread. Mrs. Margaret, who had defended Arthur during the disguise, told the story to her friends. They told other people. Soon there were articles on social media about the restaurant that had undergone a moral reform. Some new customers came specifically because they had heard about the place's renewed values. Others, long-time customers who had stopped going because of the bad service, returned to see if the changes were real. And they were. Every customer was received with the same level of respect, regardless of appearance or how much they spent. The waiter, serving a table of college students, splitting an order of fries, treated them with the same attention he gave an executive ordering the full menu. One day, about 6 weeks after the changes, Arthur decided to run another test. He again dressed in simple clothes, but this time not quite so worn out. He walked into the restaurant without notice during a moderately busy time. The hostess, a young woman who had been hired recently and didn't know the owner personally, greeted him with a genuine smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Table for one." "Yes, please." "Wonderful. Right this way, please. We have a table by the window if you'd prefer, or a more secluded one in the corner." The window is perfect. She led him to the table, pulled out his chair, and handed him the menu with both hands, a gesture of respect. Our waiter today is Raymond. He'll be right with you. In the meantime, can I bring you some water? Yes, please, thank you. Arthur observed discreetly as he waited. Raymond, the waiter who came to serve him, was a gentleman around 50 years old who had been hired in the latest round of new hires. He had worked at other restaurants for decades, but had lost his last job when the place shut down. Good afternoon, sir. Raymond greeted him politely. Is this your first time here? Actually, no, but it's been a while since I've come. Glad to have you back. May I recommend a few dishes, or would you prefer to look over the menu first? Go ahead and recommend. Raymond proceeded to describe several dishes with genuine enthusiasm, explaining ingredients, preparation methods, and flavor pairings. It was clear he had been well trained, but also that he genuinely cared about the customer's experience. Arthur placed his order and watched as Raymond wrote it down carefully, repeating it back to confirm he had understood correctly. There was no mention of prepayment, no judgment or discomfort, just professional, respectful service. When the food arrived, it was perfectly prepared. Dorothy continued to maintain her high standards, and it showed in every dish that came out of her kitchen. The seasoning was balanced, the presentation was beautiful, the temperature was ideal. Midway through the meal, Mark, the new manager, made his rounds through the tables, checking that everything was all right. When he reached Arthur's table, he showed no special recognition. To him, this was just another customer deserving of attention. Is everything to your liking, sir? It's excellent, thank you. Wonderful. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. It's a pleasure to have you with us. When Arthur finished and asked for the check, Raymond brought it promptly. The amount was correct, with no attempt to inflate prices. Arthur paid, left a generous tip, and got ready to leave. Thank you so much for visiting, the hostess said as he passed. We hope to see you again soon. Arthur walked out of the restaurant with a smile. This was the garden bistro he had envisioned 25 years ago. This was the place it should have always been. The following week, he gathered Mark, Dorothy, Madison, and a few other key staff members. You passed the test, he announced. Test? Mark asked, confused. I came back in disguise again. Not quite as shabby as the first time, but still simple, and I was treated exactly as any other customer should be treated, with respect, professionalism, and genuine kindness. Dorothy smiled. You don't trust easily, do you? Trust is good, but verification is better, Arthur replied. But I'm genuinely impressed. You didn't just implement the changes, you made them your own. That's rare and valuable. He then announced that he was going to implement a bonus system based not only on individual performance, but on how the restaurant as a whole was doing. If everyone worked together to maintain standards, everyone would benefit. I don't want competition among you, he explained. I want collaboration. I want each of you to see your colleagues' success as your own success. The months went by. Tyler completed his 6-month probationary period in the kitchen. During that time, something fundamental had changed in him. It wasn't just outward obedience, it was inner transformation. In the final session with Arthur, Tyler spoke openly. Mr. Sullivan, I wanted to thank you, not just for giving me a second chance, but for forcing me to confront who I was. These 6 months have been the hardest of my life, but they've also been the most important. How so? I learned that dignity isn't something you take from others to make yourself feel better. It's something you preserve in yourself and respect in others. I learned that every person, no matter what they do or how much they earn, has intrinsic value. And I learned that being kind isn't weakness, it's strength. Arthur studied the young man for a long moment. Do you want to go back to the dining room? Tyler hesitated. Honestly, I don't know. I've grown to like the kitchen. There's something satisfying about creating something with your own hands. But if you think I'd be more useful in the dining room, I'm willing. What if I offered a third option? Said Arthur. I'm thinking about creating a training program for new employees, focused not only on technical skills, but on the values we've discussed. Would you be interested in leading that? Tyler's eyes widened. Me? But I was the worst example of how not to act. Exactly. That makes you the perfect person to teach others about the dangers of straying from those values. You lived the consequences. You did the work of changing. You can share that experience in a way that I, who never went through it, cannot. It would be an honor, sir. And so Tyler found his new place at the Garden Bistro, not as a cruel waiter, not as a kitchen assistant doing penance, but as an educator, someone who could guide others through the same painful lessons he had learned. As for Gregory, he fulfilled his part of the agreement. He sold his expensive car and bought a more modest model. He sold some unnecessary possessions, and he began making monthly payments on the amount he had embezzled. He also started volunteering at a community center that served meals to homeless people. In the first few months he did it mechanically, just going through the motions. But gradually, something began to change. Serving food to people who truly needed it, hearing their stories, understanding that circumstances rather than character had brought many of them to that situation. It was eye-opening. One day, while serving soup, Gregory recognized someone. It was one of the men he had thrown out of the Garden Bistro months earlier, using the same cruel justification that his appearance was driving away other customers. "I know you," the man said, surprised. "You used to work at that fancy restaurant in the Upper East Side." Gregory felt shame burn across his face. "I did, I don't anymore. You kicked me out of there once, said I wasn't welcome. I know, and I'm very sorry. I was wrong, very wrong." The man studied Gregory for a moment. "Why are you here now? Doing this?" Gregory thought about lying, about dressing up the truth, but he decided to be honest. "Because I was confronted with my actions. I lost my job, and as part of making things right, I need to learn to see people, not as categories." The man nodded slowly. "Well, I suppose we all deserve second chances. This soup is good." It was a simple conversation, but it had a profound impact on Gregory. There stood a man he had humiliated, offering him a gesture of unearned forgiveness. Not because Gregory deserved it, but simply because that man chose to be better than Gregory had been. Back at the Garden Bistro, the restaurant was thriving. Online reviews had improved dramatically. Revenue was up. But more important than all of that, it was a place where people wanted to work. Employee turnover had dropped to nearly zero. People who worked there felt valued and respected. Arthur kept his promise to be more present. He had lunch at the restaurant at least twice a week, always at a different table, always observing. But he wasn't looking for mistakes. He was celebrating what was going right. One day, 6 months after all the transformation, Mrs. Margaret walked into the restaurant with several of her friends. Madison greeted them at the hostess stand with her usual warm smile. "Mrs. Margaret, what a pleasure to see you." "Madison, dear, I brought my friends. They needed to see for themselves what I've been telling them about the changes here." "I'll give you the best table we have," said Madison with genuine enthusiasm. As the group of ladies settled in, Mrs. Margaret looked around and smiled. The place looked the same physically, but the energy was completely different. There was lightness in the air, sincere laughter, staff who seemed genuinely happy to be there. Arthur, who was reviewing some papers at a table in the corner, noticed the group's arrival. He got up and walked over to their table. "Mrs. Margaret," he greeted her, "it's always a pleasure to have you here." "Mr. Arthur, what a surprise. Ladies, this is the owner I told you about." Mrs. Margaret's friends greeted him with admiration. One of them, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes, spoke up. "My son works in human resources for a large company. I told him your story, and he was fascinated. He said what you did here should be studied in business schools." Arthur smiled modestly. "I didn't do anything revolutionary. I just went back to the basics of treating people with dignity." "But that's exactly the point," the woman insisted. "Many companies forget those principles in pursuit of profit. You proved it's possible to have both." They talked for a few more minutes before Arthur excused himself to let them enjoy their meal. When he returned to his table, Sarah was arriving. She had asked to meet him there to discuss some legal matters related to the other restaurants in the chain. "Dad, we have a problem," she said as soon as she sat down. "What kind of problem?" "The manager at the Miami Beach restaurant. I received 2 formal complaints from employees about his inappropriate behavior. Nothing as serious as what Gregory did, but still concerning. Arthur sighed. It was inevitable that problems would arise. Running a business was constant work. I'll handle it. Set up a meeting with him for next week. Are you going to do the same process? Investigate, confront, give chances at redemption. If it's appropriate, yes, but every situation is unique. I need to understand exactly what's going on before deciding on a course of action. Sarah smiled. You know you're setting a precedent, right? Other business owners are watching what you're doing here. If it works in the long run, it could inspire broader change. And if it doesn't work, then at least you tried to do the right thing. That counts for a lot. They ordered lunch and enjoyed a quiet meal together, discussing not just business but family life as well. Arthur asked about his grandchildren, about Sarah's plans to expand her law practice. It was good to have these normal moments after so much drama. When they finished, Arthur went into the kitchen to greet Dorothy. She was supervising 3 assistants, including Tyler, who had now mastered basic kitchen techniques and was beginning to learn more complex things. "How's our redemption project going?" asked Arthur, nodding toward Tyler. "Very well," replied Dorothy. "He has a knack for this, and more importantly, he has the heart for it now." Tyler, who had overheard the compliment, blushed slightly but stayed focused on what he was doing. He was preparing a tomato sauce from scratch, something that required patience and attention to detail. Arthur watched for a moment before speaking. "Tyler, can I interrupt you for a second?" "Of course, Mr. Sullivan. I wanted to say I'm impressed with your progress, not just technically but as a person. Are you understanding what we've been trying to teach you here?" "I am, sir. And thank you for the chance. I know I didn't deserve it. Everyone deserves a chance to be better than they were. The important thing is to seize it." 3 months later, the Garden Bistro celebrated its 26th anniversary. Arthur organized a party for all the employees and their families, an event that hadn't happened in years. The restaurant was closed to the public for an entire Sunday, and the tables were rearranged to accommodate about 60 people, including staff, spouses, and children. Tyler's mother came all the way from the Hamptons, especially for the occasion. When she walked into the restaurant and saw her son dressed in his clean kitchen uniform, her eyes filled with tears. They weren't tears of sadness, but of pride. She had heard from him directly, through honest and vulnerable phone calls about everything that had happened, about his mistakes, his downfall, and his attempt to rebuild. "Mom," said Tyler, hugging her tightly, "I'm so glad you came. I wouldn't have missed this for anything, son. You have no idea how long I've waited to see you like this again." "What do you mean?" "With humility in your eyes, with gratitude in your heart. You were like this as a child. Then, I don't know what happened, but now you've become my little boy again." Tyler couldn't hold back his tears. Standing there, embraced by his mother, he understood that redemption wasn't just about getting a job back or fixing professional mistakes. It was about reclaiming himself, the person he should have been all along. Mrs. Dorothy had also brought her 2 daughters, both college graduates thanks to their mother's years of hard work. The girls, Lily and Sophie, had grown up hearing stories about the restaurant, about the challenges their mother faced, but also about the passion she had for cooking. "Mom, Mr. Sullivan seems like an incredible person," commented Lily, watching as Arthur moved between the tables, greeting each family personally. "He is. He's the one who gave me my first chance 25 years ago, and now he's given me a second chance to work under decent leadership." "Do you ever think about retiring?" asked Sophie. Dorothy thought for a moment. "You know what? No. Now that things are good again, I want to keep going. I want to train the next generation of cooks. I want to pass on everything I've learned. I have enough energy for a few more years, God willing." Madison was sitting with her mother, Mrs. Susan, and her 2 younger siblings. The 12-year-old boy was impressed by the size of the restaurant. "Sis, you work here every day?" "Every day, yes. And now I'm a supervisor. I manage the entire service team." "You get to boss people around?" asked her 10-year-old sister with admiration. "It's not really bossing around, it's more like guiding, helping, making sure everyone does a good job and is happy doing it." Mrs. Susan squeezed her daughter's hand with pride. She knew how much Madison had struggled in her first weeks on the job, witnessing injustices and feeling powerless. But now her daughter had not only kept her job, but grown within it. She had been promoted, recognized, and valued. When dinner time arrived, Arthur asked for everyone's attention. He stood at the front of the dining room, microphone in hand, and a smile on his face. "Good evening, everyone. First, I want to thank you all for being here. This celebration isn't just about the restaurant's anniversary, it's about you. About every person who contributes to making this place something special." Polite applause echoed through the room. "A few months ago, I did something unusual. I went back to my own restaurant in disguise to see how things really worked, and what I found was disappointing, but it was also revealing. It showed me that I had drifted too far, trusted the wrong people, and allowed a toxic culture to take root." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Since then, we've made significant changes, but those changes wouldn't have worked if it weren't for your willingness to embrace them, for your openness to doing things differently, for your commitment to the values we discussed." Arthur walked among the tables as he spoke, making eye contact with different people. "I want you to know that this isn't temporary. This is permanent. This is the Garden Bistro from here on out. A place built on respect, dignity, quality, and humanity. And as long as I'm alive and able, I'll defend those values with everything I've got." More applause, this time more enthusiastic. "I also have some announcements. First, Dorothy Fletcher, our head chef, completed 25 years of service this month. Dorothy, please stand up." Dorothy stood up, embarrassed by the sudden attention. Her daughters clapped loudly, proud. "Dorothy has been the backbone of this place since the day we opened. She maintained quality standards even when everything around her was falling apart. And for that, in addition to the seniority bonus that was already planned, I'm giving her a 5% stake in the restaurant's profits. From now on, you're not just an employee, you're a partner." The room erupted in applause. Dorothy covered her face with her hands, tears streaming through her fingers. Her daughters ran to hug her. It was a recognition she never imagined receiving, an investment in her future that would completely change her financial life. "Second," Arthur continued as the applause died down, "Madison Sawyer has shown exceptional leadership over the past few months. She's only 23, but she already shows a maturity and integrity that people much older don't always have. Madison, you're being promoted to assistant manager, with a corresponding raise and a spot in management training programs. I'm investing in you because I believe you have a bright future in this field." Madison's mouth dropped open. Assistant manager? She had just gotten used to the idea of being a supervisor. Now she was being lifted even higher, faster than she ever dreamed. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan," she managed to say, her voice trembling. "I'll work hard to honor that trust." "I know you will," Arthur replied with a fatherly smile. "And last but not least, Tyler Sterling. Tyler, can you come up here?" Tyler hesitated, not expecting to be called out publicly. But Dorothy gave him a little encouraging nudge, and he walked over to where Arthur was standing. "Tyler made serious mistakes," Arthur said bluntly. "He was cruel, insensitive, and actively took part in deplorable situations. Many would say he didn't deserve a second chance." The room fell completely silent. Tyler kept his eyes down, feeling the weight of shame all over again. "But I gave him that chance," Arthur continued, "and he seized it. Over the past 6 months, I've seen genuine transformation. I've seen true humility. I've seen someone confront his inner demons and choose to be better." Arthur placed his hand on Tyler's shoulder. "That's why I'm promoting you to training and human development coordinator. You'll be responsible for training all new employees, not just in technical skills, but in the values that make this place what it is. You'll share your story, your lessons, and you'll help others avoid the mistakes you made." Tyler looked up, tears streaming freely down his face. "Mr. Arthur, I don't know what to say. Say you'll do an exceptional job. Say you'll honor this opportunity. And say you'll pay forward the grace you received. I will, I promise, I'll do all of that and more." The two embraced, a moment of complete reconciliation witnessed by everyone present. Tyler's mother wept openly in the audience, as did several other people. It was impossible not to be moved by that display of redemption and second chances. When dinner was served, Arthur circulated among the tables, talking with the families. He made a point of learning the names of every spouse, every child. He asked about schools, hobbies, dreams. It wasn't empty protocol. It was genuine interest. When he reached Madison's family table, her younger siblings grew shy in the presence of the owner. But Arthur had a way of making children feel comfortable. "So you're Madison's siblings. She talks about you a lot." "She does?" asked the boy, surprised. "She sure does. She said you're very smart and that she'll do everything she can so you can study and have whatever opportunities you want." Mrs. Susan discreetly wiped away a tear. Hearing that, knowing that her daughter not only had a good job, but also a boss who knew her as a whole person with a family and dreams, was more than she could have hoped for. The night continued with music, dancing, and plenty of food. Dorothy had overseen the preparation of a banquet that showcased the full range of the kitchen's capabilities. There were traditional American dishes prepared with refined technique: slow-cooked country pot roast, seafood gumbo, creamy shrimp stew, Texas-style barbecue, savory crab cakes. It was a celebration not just of the bistro, but of American cuisine in all its diversity. When dessert was served, an elegant woman walked into the restaurant. It was Sarah Sullivan, Arthur's daughter. She had brought with her a special gift, a professionally assembled photo album documenting the history of the Garden Bistro from its opening to the present day. "Dad, I thought it would be nice to have this," she said, handing over the album, "so everyone can see where we came from and appreciate how far we've come." Arthur flipped through the pages, seeing photos from opening day, of famous customers who had dined there over the years, of employees who had passed through the restaurant. There were photos of special events, renovations, awards received. It was a visual timeline of 26 years of history. "This is wonderful, Sarah. Let's put it somewhere everyone can see." And so they did. The album was placed on a pedestal near the entrance, where customers and employees could flip through it and appreciate the journey of the place. It was a constant reminder that the Garden Bistro was more than a business. It was a legacy. It was a collective story written by hundreds of people over the years. In the months that followed, the restaurant's transformation grew even stronger. Tyler began his work as training coordinator and proved to have a natural gift for teaching. He had an honest vulnerability that made new employees feel safe to ask questions, make mistakes, and learn. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he led training sessions where he not only taught technical procedures, but also shared his own story. He held nothing back. He talked about his arrogance, his cruelty, his fall, and his rebuilding. And it always ended with the same message: treat every person who walks through that door as if they were the most important person in the world. Because for them, at that moment, that place is their world, and you have the power to make that world welcoming or hostile. Choose wisely. One day during a training session, a new waiter raised his hand. "Tyler, don't you think customers sometimes go overboard, that they get too annoying?" "Absolutely," Tyler answered honestly. "Some customers are difficult, some are rude, but you know what I've learned. That usually says more about the bad day they're having than about who they really are. And even when that's not the case, even when they're genuinely unpleasant people, we can still choose how to respond. We can fire back with more rudeness, or we can keep our dignity and professionalism. But isn't it unfair, having to be polite to someone who doesn't deserve it?" Life is unfair in many ways, but what I've discovered is that when you choose to be the better person, you sleep soundly at night, you don't carry regret, and eventually that consistent choice shapes your character. You genuinely become a better person, not just someone pretending to be. It was wisdom earned through personal hardship, and it resonated deeply with the new employees. Madison, as assistant manager, worked directly with Mark on the restaurant's day-to-day operations. She had a lot to learn, but Mark was a patient mentor. "The most important thing," he would say, "is to never lose sight of the fact that we're dealing with people, not just numbers or processes. Yes, we need to be efficient and profitable, but never at the expense of the humanity of the people involved." Madison absorbed everything like a sponge. She took meticulous notes, asked questions constantly, and whenever she faced a difficult situation, she would stop and think, what would be the right answer? Not just from a business standpoint, but from the standpoint of the restaurant's values. There was one particular incident that tested her new authority. A clearly intoxicated customer started being inappropriate with one of the waitresses, making lewd comments and trying to touch her. The waitress, a young woman named Chloe, came running to Madison with tears in her eyes. "I don't know what to do. He won't stop, and his table spent a lot of money." Madison felt the weight of the decision. The old her would have frozen, afraid of making the wrong move, but now she knew what the restaurant's values demanded. "How much money he spent doesn't matter," she said firmly. "No one has the right to treat you like that. I'll handle this." She marched over to the customer's table, accompanied by Mark, who had watched the situation unfold. "Sir," Madison said with a firm but polite voice, "I'm hearing that you've been making inappropriate comments toward our staff member. I need to ask you to stop immediately." "Oh, relax," the man said, slurring his words. "I was just being friendly." "No, sir. Being friendly doesn't include touching someone without permission or making comments of a sexual nature. That's harassment and it will not be tolerated here." The man scowled. "You guys are way too sensitive. I'm a customer. I'm paying. I can say whatever I want." "Actually, you can't," Mark interjected. "And since you've made it clear you have no intention of respecting our staff, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Your bill will be comped. You don't need to pay for anything. But you need to leave now." "You can't kick me out. I'll sue." "You have every right to try," Mark said calmly. "But we have security cameras that recorded your behavior and several witnesses, so I suggest you leave with what's left of your dignity intact." The man grumbled and cursed, but eventually left. Once he was gone, Madison went to talk to Chloe. "Are you okay?" "I am. Thank you for standing up for me." "I was afraid you would side with him because of the money." "Never," said Madison emphatically. "Your well-being is more important than any amount of money. Always." News of that incident spread quickly among the employees, and it reinforced something crucial. The changes weren't just talk. They were concrete actions. Management truly prioritized people over profit when necessary. Meanwhile, Gregory continued serving his sentence of redemption. He had completed 8 months of volunteer work and had already paid back more than half of what he owed. But more than that, he was changing on the inside. Working with people in vulnerable situations had been humiliating at first, but gradually he began to see beyond the circumstances. He began to hear stories. A man who had lost everything in a fire. A woman who fled an abusive relationship and was left with nothing. A young person who aged out of the foster care system with no support network. Each story was a reminder of how fragile the line between stability and chaos was. Any of them, including Gregory, was just a few unfortunate events away from being in that same situation. One day after finishing his shift at the community center, Gregory went to visit Arthur. He had requested the meeting, saying he had something important to discuss. They met at a neutral coffee shop away from the restaurant. Gregory looked different, less polished, less performative, more real. "Mr. Sullivan, thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "Of course, Gregory. How are you?" "I'm different. Better in some ways, worse in others, but definitely different." "Explain." Gregory took a deep breath. "When you sentenced me to work with homeless people, I was angry. I thought it was humiliating. I thought it was excessive punishment. But now I understand it was the most merciful thing you could have done. Why? Because it forced me to confront my own arrogance, my belief that some people were worth more than others. Working there, serving those people, hearing their stories. It broke me in a way that was necessary." Arthur nodded, listening attentively. "I realized I was exactly as you found me on those days when you were in disguise. I judged people by their appearance, their status, their money, and in the process I became empty inside. I had things, but I had no character. And now? Now I'm rebuilding. I won't lie and say I'm a completely transformed person. I still have bad thoughts sometimes. I still struggle against the urge to judge, but at least now I'm aware of it. I'm actively fighting those impulses instead of embracing them." "That's significant progress," Arthur acknowledged. "I wanted to ask, when I finish paying what I owe, When I complete my community service time, what comes next? What do you want to come next? Gregory thought carefully before answering. I want to continue with volunteer work, not out of obligation, but because I discovered it's where I feel most useful, most human. I'm also thinking about taking a social work course. Maybe I can turn this into a career, help other people who, like me, need to learn what really matters in life. Arthur smiled. It was the answer he had expected, but coming from Gregory genuinely, not as something calculated to impress. I think it's an excellent idea, and if you need a reference for the course, I'll be happy to provide one. Really? Even after everything? Gregory, the past is the past. What matters now is who you're choosing to become, and if you're making better choices, I'll support that. They talked for another hour, and when they said goodbye, there was a lightness between them that hadn't existed before. They weren't friends, and probably never would be. But there was mutual respect, and a recognition of shared humanity. Back at the Garden Bistro, life continued with its new healthy rhythm. The restaurant was consistently full, not just because the food was good, but because the overall experience was excellent. Customers knew they would be treated well there, that they would be respected, that their dignity would be preserved regardless of who they were or how much they spent. One day, a group of executives came in for a business lunch. They were 4 middle-aged men, all dressed in expensive suits, clearly people of influence. Madison received them with her signature hospitality and led them to a table. The service was impeccable. Raymond, the waiter serving them, was attentive without being intrusive. The food came out perfect. But what really struck those men was watching how the entire team interacted. They saw waiters treating every customer with the same level of respect. They saw Madison helping an elderly woman who was having trouble reading the menu. They saw Tyler, during a quick break from his administrative duties, patiently talking to a new employee who seemed nervous. At the end of the meal, one of the executives asked to speak with the manager. Mark came to the table, expecting a complaint or a special request. "How can I help?" "I want to commend you," said the executive. "I own a chain of stores, and I'm always looking for examples of excellence in customer service to train my team. What I saw here today was exceptional. Not just the technical service, but the culture, the way you treat people. Thank you, sir. That means a lot to us. Is it possible to speak with the owner? I'd like to ask about the possibility of bringing my management team here for a sort of workshop. I'd pay well, of course." Mark smiled. "I'll pass the request along to Mr. Sullivan. I'm sure he'll be interested." When Arthur heard about the request, he was intrigued. He had never considered the Garden Bistro as a business model to be taught, but why not? If they could help other companies build better cultures, it would be a multiplied positive impact. He agreed, and 3 weeks later, the first workshop took place. 15 managers from different stores in the chain came to the restaurant on a specially arranged closing day. Arthur, Mark, Tyler, and Dorothy led sessions explaining not just what they did, but why and how. Tyler told his complete story, sparing no details about his mistakes. It was difficult, exposing his flaws to strangers, but he understood that his story had power precisely because of its honesty. "I was exactly the kind of employee you don't want," he admitted. "Cruel, judgmental, more concerned with my own ego than with doing what was right. And I nearly destroyed not just my career but my character in the process." The managers listened in respectful silence. "The point I want to make is, if I could change, anyone can. But it requires honest recognition of the problem, willingness to do the hard work of changing, and an environment that supports that change instead of punishing without offering redemption." At the end of the day, the managers left inspired. Several of them sought out Arthur personally to thank him. "You don't know the impact this can have," said a woman who managed 3 large stores. "We're in an industry where employees are often treated as replaceable. But seeing that it's possible to build something different, where people thrive, it's revolutionary." That workshop was the first of many. Word spread, and other companies began asking to bring their teams to learn from the Garden Bistro. Arthur eventually formalized it, creating a small consulting firm focused on organizational culture and people-first customer service. Tyler became one of the stars of those sessions. His story of redemption resonated deeply with people struggling against their own professional demons, and he discovered a vocation he never imagined he had, that of educator and mentor. 2 years had passed since the day Arthur walked into the restaurant in disguise. The Garden Bistro wasn't just financially prosperous, it was a place where people genuinely wanted to work. The waiting list for openings was long because his reputation as a good employer had spread. Dorothy, now 71, still ran the kitchen with a firm but gentle hand. Her daughters often visited, bringing the grandchildren to see the place where their grandmother had spent so much of her life. And Dorothy had started writing a cookbook, not just with recipes, but with the stories behind them. Madison, now 25, had been promoted to full manager. Mark had decided to open his own restaurant in another state and recommended Madison as his successor. Arthur agreed without hesitation. She had proven she was ready. Tyler continued as training coordinator, but he had also started giving lectures at universities on professional ethics and personal redemption. He was now engaged to a young woman he met at the community center where he volunteered. She taught underprivileged children, and the two shared a passion for making a difference in people's lives. Gregory had completed his social work degree and now officially worked at the community center that had once been his sentence. He earned far less than he had as manager of the Garden Bistro, but he was genuinely happy. He had purpose. He had peace. On an autumn afternoon, Arthur was sitting at his favorite table in the restaurant, reviewing financial reports. Sarah came to visit him, bringing her 2 teenage children. "Dad, the kids wanted to see the restaurant. I told them the whole story." "Did you?" Arthur looked at his grandchildren. "And what did they think?" The oldest, Miguel, 16, answered, "I thought it was amazing, Grandpa. Like you basically went into your own business in disguise to find out the truth. It's kind of like a spy movie, but in real life." Arthur laughed. "It wasn't quite like that. It was more painful and less glamorous than it sounds. But you changed everything," said the youngest, Sophia, 14. "You fired the bad people, gave good people chances, and made the place better. That's cool." "The really cool part," Arthur corrected gently, "is that it wasn't just me. It was all the people who worked to make those changes happen. I just created the conditions. They did the heavy lifting." Sarah smiled, proud of her father for teaching the grandchildren humility. "Dad, I have a proposal for you." "What is it?" "Have you ever thought about writing about all of this, not as a dry business book, but as a story? Something that inspires people beyond the corporate world?" "Me? Right. Sarah, I'm a cook who became a businessman, not a writer." "But you have a powerful story about humility, about giving second chances, about building businesses with soul. I think a lot of people would benefit from hearing it." Arthur thought about the suggestion. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe there was value in sharing not just the successes, but also the failures, the lessons learned the hard way. "I'll think about it." That night, after the restaurant closed, Arthur was alone in the dining room. He walked among the empty tables, remembering. 28 years ago, he had been there for the first time, turning an empty space into his dream. He had been so hopeful, so idealistic. He thought all it took was making good food and treating people well. But life was more complicated than that. Businesses grew, he drifted away. The wrong people took control, values deteriorated, and he had almost lost everything he had built, not financially, but in terms of integrity. Those 2 weeks in disguise had been humiliating, painful, revealing, but they had also been necessary. He had to feel in his own skin what his customers were feeling. He had to see with his own eyes what his business had become. And now, after all that rebuilding work, he had something more precious than profit. He had a place that genuinely represented his values. He had a team that understood and lived those values. He had created not just a business, but a small model of how the world could be if more people chose dignity over convenience, humanity over cold efficiency. His phone rang. It was a message from Tyler. "Mr. Sullivan, I just wanted to thank you again for believing in me when no one else did. Today I gave my first lecture at the university. It was terrifying, but incredible. Dozens of students came up to talk to me afterward. I think the story really touches people. Thank you for giving me a redemption story to tell instead of a story of definitive failure. Arthur smiled and typed a reply. Tyler, redemption was always possible. I only opened the door. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it and do the work. Proud of you. He put his phone away and turned off the lights, leaving only the emergency lighting on. Outside, the city remained alive with movement and lights, millions of stories happening simultaneously. Millions of people fighting their own battles, making their own decisions about what kind of people they wanted to be. And there, in that small corner of New York City, in a restaurant called the Garden Bistro, some of those people had found a place where they chose to be better, where they received second chances, where they learned that dignity was not a luxury, but a fundamental right. Arthur closed the door and walked slowly to his car. His knees still hurt, a constant reminder that he was 75 years old now. But his heart was light. He had done something significant. Not just built a business, but touched lives, changed trajectories, offered hope. And in the end, wasn't that what truly mattered? Not the amount of money accumulated or awards received, but the difference made in people's lives. The legacy left not in stones or papers, but in transformed hearts and minds. While driving home, Arthur thought about Sarah's suggestion. Maybe he really should write about all of it, not to glorify himself, but to inspire others, to show that change was possible, that redemption was real, that businesses could have a soul without sacrificing success. It was a message the world needed to hear, especially now in times when cynicism and cruelty seemed so common, where people were reduced to numbers and transactions, where humanity was often seen as a weakness to be overcome rather than a strength to be cultivated. Maybe the story of the Garden Bistro, the cruel waiter who became an inspiring educator, the loyal cook who became a partner, the shy young woman who became a confident leader, the corrupt manager who found redemption through service. Maybe these intertwined stories could remind people of something fundamental, that everyone was worthy of respect, everyone was capable of change, and everyone deserved chances to be better. Yes, Arthur decided as he parked in front of his apartment. He would write that story. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon, when he found the right words, when he could do justice to the people who had been part of that journey. For now, it was enough to know he had done the right thing, that he had faced the problem instead of ignoring it, that he had chosen redemption over revenge, rebuilding over destruction, and that, in the process, he had not only saved his restaurant, but rediscovered himself. The Garden Bistro was thriving, the people who worked there were thriving, and the customers who walked through that door were welcomed not as business transactions, but as human beings worthy of respect and care. It was simple, really, so simple that most people forgot. But it was the most important truth of all. Treat people the way you would like to be treated. Offer second chances the way you would like to receive them. Build with integrity the way you would like to see the world built. And in the end, leave a legacy not of accumulated wealth, but of lives touched and worlds transformed. One person, one interaction, one choice at a time. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of the story. Do you think Arthur made the right decision in giving second chances to Tyler and Gregory? Where are you joining us from? If this story moved you or made you reflect on how we treat the people around us, leave your sincere words in the comments. We love reading every opinion. Thank you so much for your company up to this point. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories we're going to bring to you.